So the first problem that I chose was from chapter 1, section 1, and it was about the real numbers, inequalities, and lines. And this question asked to find the slope of the line through the following pair of points, and these are your 2 points, and so you label your points, which you label the 2x1, the 4y1, the 3x2, and the y12, and then this would be your formula. So then you plug it in, and your y2 would be 1, and then you put the minus sign, and then y1 would be 4, and then you do x2, which is 3, and then x1, which is 2, and then that would be 3 and 1, so your slope comes out as a negative 3.
The first problem I chose was from Unit 1, Section 4, which is when you graph, and I chose to graph a linear function, which your formula would be mx plus b, and m being your slope and b being your y-intercept. And the example is f of x, 2x minus 3, y being your negative 3, and slope would be 2, and then you would change it to rise over run, which is just putting a 1 under the 2. Then you would graph your y-intercept, which is negative 3, so that's located right here. Then you would put your slope, which is rise 2, and then run 1, and then you just keep doing that continuously until you reach the end of your graph, and you just connect the dots. So for Unit 3, Section 2a, you have to state the dimension of the matrix, and this is your matrix, and you have to state your dimensions, which is 2 by 4, and 2 being your rows and 4 being your columns. So you find the value of a, 1, 2, and 1 would be your row, while 2 will be your column. So your row 1 is this one, and for your column it'd be 2, so you'll go over 2, and it'd be negative 1, which that is your a12. Then you find the value of a24, which would be your second row in your 4th column, which is 1, and that is your 1 is your a24.
My problem from Unit 3, Section 2 was on matrix row operations, and you would have to multiply 3 times row 2 to change row 2, and you would end up with 3, 3, and 39, and this would be your final solution.
So for Unit 4, Section 1a, linear inequalities, this is your function, and when your sign is less than, that means that you would shade above, and when you have a line under, that means that your line will be solid, and when you don't have a line under, that makes your line dotted. So your first function will equal x equals negative 3 and y equals 3. And for your second function, x equals negative 1 and your y equals negative 1. So first you graph your first function, which is negative 3 and 3, and you make a solid line because it has a line under. And then for your second one, you make a dotted line on negative 1 and negative 1, and that's your end result.
So my third problem was from Unit 4, Section 3, and it was finding the pivot column and pivot row. And to find your pivot column, you would have to see which one of these were the smallest numbers, and that would be this column. And then to find your pivot row, you would have to divide 9 into 1 and 14 into 1, which makes 9 the smallest, so it would be your pivot row, and making your pivot element 1.